What version of Punisher could we see in Spider-Man Brand New Day, with the Punisher now confirmed to appear? We will be seeing a brutal battle-hardened vigilante who operates completely outside the law, unlike Spider-Man, who believes in protecting life and bringing criminals to justice, while Frank Castle is a soldier at war with crime and someone who believes the only way to stop dangerous criminals is to eliminate them permanently. This version of the Punisher would bring a much darker edge to the story, who is a highly trained tactician, expert marksman, and relentless hunter who stalks the criminal underworld of New York with military precision. That contrast between Peter Parker's hopeful moral approach and Frank Castle's ruthless war on crime could create one of the most intense dynamics Spider-Man has ever faced on screen. To understand what version of the Punisher we could see in Spider-Man Brand New Day, we first need to understand the man behind the skull, Frank Castle, and the stories that defined his brutal war on crime. Unlike most heroes in Marvel, the Punisher is not driven by hope, responsibility, or even redemption. He is driven by loss and by a belief that the justice system simply does not work. One of the most important stories that explores this idea is Punisher Year One, which dives into the origin of Frank Castle. In this story, Frank is portrayed as a decorated Marine who returns home from war hoping to rebuild his life with his family. But everything changes when he witnesses the brutal murder of his wife and children during a mob shootout in Central Park, and that moment becomes the catalyst for everything that follows. Consumed by grief and rage, Frank abandons his old identity and dedicates his life to eradicating crime by any means necessary. This is where the Punisher is truly born, not as a superhero, but as a one-man war on crime. His entire philosophy comes from this moment. If the system fails to protect innocent people, then someone has to step in and do what the system cannot. This origin becomes incredibly important when thinking about Brand New Day, because when Frank Castle appears in the MCU, it means Peter Parker will go face to face with someone whose philosophy is the complete opposite of his own. Spider-Man believes in saving people and giving criminals a chance to face justice, while the Punisher believes the only way to stop dangerous criminals is to eliminate them completely. That clash of ideals is exactly what has made their interactions so fascinating throughout Marvel Comics. Spider-Man fights to protect life, and Frank Castle sees himself as a soldier in a never-ending war against crime, and when these two characters are forced to cross paths in Brand New Day, the tension between them could become one of the most compelling dynamics in the entire film. Some of the clearest examples of Frank's ruthless mission come from the work of Garth Ennis, particularly the storyline Welcome Back Frank, released in 2000. As this story shows just how relentless Frank Castle truly is when he returns to New York City and begins a brutal one-man war against the Ganucci crime family. Rather than confronting them like a traditional hero, Frank systematically dismantles the entire organization using precision, strategy, and overwhelming force. Every move he makes is calculated, every target is chosen carefully. To Frank, these criminals are part of a larger system of corruption, and the only way to truly reduce crime is to destroy the organizations that control it. This idea cutting off the head of the snake is something that could easily translate into the MCU if Brand New Day leans into a darker street-level story, which is likely to be the case with Tombstone likely to appear. The Punisher could be targeting criminal organizations operating throughout New York, and that kind of war could easily pull Spider-Man into conflict with him. Another story that provides deeper insight into the mindset of Frank Castle is Punisher, Born, which takes place during the Vietnam War. This story explores Frank's time as a soldier and shows that the seeds of the Punisher were forming long before the death of his family. During the chaos of war, Frank demonstrates an unsettling ability to survive and even thrive in the most brutal situations imaginable. His moral compass begins to shift as he witnesses the harsh realities of combat, and the war teaches him that traditional moral codes often fail in extreme circumstances, and sometimes the only way to impose order is through direct and violent action. By the time Frank returns home, those experiences have already shaped the man he will become. This history could also influence the version of the Punisher we see in the MCU, a battle-hardened soldier whose mindset was forged long before he ever put on the skull. One of the darkest and most disturbing Punisher stories ever written is The Slavers, part of the Punisher Max run. In this storyline, Frank Castle wages a brutal crusade against a human trafficking ring operating out of Eastern Europe. The story exposes the horrifying reality of modern-day slavery, and it shows the Punisher at his absolute most ruthless. Frank believes that certain crimes are beyond redemption, and in his mind people responsible for atrocities like human trafficking cannot be rehabilitated. They must simply be removed from the world. At one point in the story, Frank captures the leader of the trafficking operation, ties him to a chair, douses him in gasoline, and sets him on fire while recording the entire act. He then sends the footage to the traffickers' leaders overseas as a warning not to return to New York, and it works. Moments like this highlight just how terrifying Frank Castle can be, and if even a fraction of that intensity makes its way into Brand New Day, it could dramatically shift the tone of the film. Another important exploration of Frank's methods comes from the Punisher war machine. This series shows the Punisher adapting his tactics and evolving his war on crime. Frank operates with military precision using surveillance, planning and strategic strikes to dismantle criminal networks. Each enemy he faces represents a different side of crime and corruption, and Frank responds to each one with the same relentless determination. What becomes clear throughout the series is that the Punisher operates under his own moral code, one that prioritizes protecting innocent people at any cost, even if it means crossing lines that other heroes would never consider. That mindset escalates even further in Punisher War Machine, where Frank gains access to the War Machine armor originally created by Tony Stark and used by James Rhodes. With that technology, the Punisher takes his war on crime to a global level. Criminal organizations and oppressive regimes become his targets, and the scale of his mission grows dramatically. The armor gives him advanced weapons and capabilities that allow him to eliminate threats far beyond what a normal vigilante could face. While this version of the Punisher might be too extreme for Brand New Day, it highlights an important part of Frank Castle's character, as he will use whatever tools are necessary to complete his mission. The broader Punisher Max series provides one of the deepest explorations of Frank Castle's psyche throughout the run. He is portrayed as an unstoppable force dedicated entirely to eradicating crime and corruption wherever it exists. Across all of these stories, one thing becomes clear. Frank Castle believes the traditional justice system has failed. In his mind, if the system cannot stop criminals, then someone else has to step in and do what the law cannot. That uncompromising belief is what defines the Punisher and separates him from other heroes. And that mindset is exactly what could make his appearance in Spider-Man Brand New Day so fascinating. When Spider-Man crosses paths with the Punisher in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Peter Parker could be forced to confront a question he has rarely had to face before. What happens when someone fighting crime refuses to play by the same rules? Peter believes in responsibility restraint and protecting life whenever possible. Frank Castle, on the other hand, believes some criminals are beyond redemption, and that clash of philosophies alone could push Spider-Man into one of the most conflicting moral battles of his entire journey. Whether the Punisher becomes an uneasy ally, a rival, or even a temporary enemy, their interaction would almost certainly challenge Peter's ideals in ways we have not seen on screen before. If the MCU chooses to explore that dynamic, Brand New Day could deliver one of the most intense street-level Spider-Man stories yet. Imagine Spider-Man caught between stopping violent criminals and preventing the Punisher from taking justice too far. The stakes could feel much more grounded with brutal crime in New York, forcing Peter to question how far a hero should go, and the villains could make that conflict even more explosive. What if Spider-Man and the Punisher are forced to deal with a terrifying threat, like Scorpion bonded with the Venom symbiote? Add ruthless street-level criminals like Tombstone or Boomerang, and suddenly Spider-Man is dealing with a war in the streets rather than a typical supervillain showdown. So the big question is, which version of the Punisher would you want to see in the movie? Would he clash with Spider-Man over their different moral codes, or eventually team up with him to take down a larger threat? Drop your predictions in the comments, as I would love to hear how you think this story could play out. The trailer is rumoured to arrive very soon, and when it does, we could get our very first glimpse of the Punisher and the version of the character we might see in Brand New Day, which releases on the 31st of July 2026, when the trailer drops. It may finally reveal whether the Punisher will be going head-to-head with Spider-Man, or if the two could end up forming an alliance against larger threats, which would be absolutely insane to see play out. And those threats could be terrifying, such as Scorpion potentially bonded with Venom, along with characters like Tombstone and Boomerang entering the picture. There are so many different directions the story could take, so many possibilities for how these characters might clash or cross paths, and it really feels like anything could happen at this point. Brand New Day could even pick up directly from the events of Spider-Man No Way Home, showing us what Peter Parker's life looks like now that the world has forgotten who he is. For now though, we will just have to wait until the trailer officially drops, but it is safe to say that the hype for Brand New Day is only going to keep growing from here, and I cannot wait until it comes out to see it all unfold. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more Spider-Man and Marvel content, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next upload. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.